I was fired over Zoom while my slides were still showcasing my ideas. They thought I'd stay silent like always. But this time, I didn't just leave. I took the company's heart with me and handed it to my ex-boss's biggest rival. Want to know why? Sit down, grab a coffee. This story will make you question every professional breakup that happens on screen. My name is Claire Morgan, a 34-year-old microchip engineer with 12 years at Orion Circuits. What began as my dream job in semiconductor design had slowly morphed into something else entirely. A masterclass in corporate theft disguised as team achievement. I still remember that Monday morning meeting clearly. The sun streamed through my home office window as I logged into the company-wide Zoom call. The calendar invite had been cryptic. Strategic direction discussion. Mandatory. Nothing unusual there. Greg Stanton, our 45-year-old self-proclaimed visionary CEO, loved his surprise announcements. What was unusual was seeing my energy-efficient chip design splashed across everyone's screens while Greg paced in his corner office, gesturing with the practiced confidence of a seasoned TED speaker. This breakthrough, he announced to the team and the investors who had quietly joined the call, represents the future of Orion Circuits, a 37% reduction in power consumption without sacrificing processing speed. This is the result of our R&D team's efforts under my leadership. I sat motionless, my microphone muted, my camera off. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a silent scream building inside me. This wasn't the first time Greg had claimed my work as the fruit of his visionary leadership. But something felt different today. The way he emphasized my leadership while showcasing the circuit diagrams I had spent weekends perfecting, it carried the finality of someone closing a door. In my head, I was already unlocking my secret arsenal. 12 years of systematic intellectual theft were about to reach their conclusion. I just didn't know yet how spectacularly it would all unravel. The pattern was painfully familiar. For 12 years, I had watched Greg take credit for everything from my first module designs to the successful test runs of technologies that would later become industry standards. Each time I approached him about recognition or the promotion I deserved, I'd receive a branded company mug, a generic team player certificate, or the empty promise that next year will be different. What Greg didn't know, what no one at Orion knew except for the company's original legal counsel who had since retired, was that I had Clause 9.2. This small paragraph, buried in my employment contract, had been slipped in by my mother, an intellectual property attorney who had seen too many brilliant minds exploited by corporate America. All inventions registered under Claire Morgan's name remain the intellectual property of Claire Morgan, regardless of when or where they were developed. It was unusual, perhaps even unprecedented. The clause had made it through only because Orion was a mid-sized company with ambitious global aspirations, but disorganized legal oversight when I was hired. By the time they had a proper legal team, my contract was already filed away, forgotten by everyone except me. I had been patient. I had registered every significant innovation under my name with the Patent Office, quietly maintaining my paper trail while allowing Greg and Orion to showcase their technological breakthroughs to the world. I never spoke up, not even when Greg would smile at me across the conference room table with that look that said, "We both know, but what can you do about it?" Until that Monday. The weekend before the fateful Zoom call, Greg had organized a company-wide virtual meeting. Casual catch-up, the invitation said. Wear your favorite weekend attire. I joined from my balcony, coffee in hand, watching hummingbirds dart around my feeder. Greg appeared on screen in a golf shirt, his Hamptons vacation home visible in the background. Team, he began with that practiced warmth that never quite reached his eyes. We've had an incredible quarter. Thanks to all of you for your dedication. Standard preamble, I took another sip of coffee. As you know, the market is shifting rapidly. We need to be agile, forward-thinking. Greg's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened. Which is why we're implementing some structural changes effective immediately. My stomach tightened as he continued through a series of organizational announcements. Then, Claire, Unfortunately, your position has been deemed redundant in our new structure. This will be effective immediately. HR will contact you regarding your exit package. I felt a curious calm descend over me. 12 years, gone in 15 words, delivered while my design was still being celebrated in investor meetings. I unmuted myself, turned on my camera, and smiled. Thank you for confirming that, Greg. Goodbye. I closed my laptop, walked to my home office safe, and pulled out the folder containing Clause 9.2 and all my patent documentation. The game I had been patiently playing for 12 years had just entered its final phase. Sophie Quinn had been trying to recruit me to Horizon Microsystems for 3 years. A brilliant attorney who had founded her own semiconductor company. She represented everything Greg Stanton feared: legitimate innovation, transparent leadership, and a rapidly growing market share. I had always declined her offers, citing loyalty to Orion. The word now tasted bitter as I composed a simple email. Sophie, Clause 9.2 is ready. Coffee tomorrow. Her response came within minutes. Perfect. Game activation confirmed. The usual place, 9 a.m. The next morning, I drove to Orion's headquarters one last time. My security badge still worked. HR inefficiency that would prove costly for them. I walked through the open concept office where I had spent countless late nights, nodding to confused colleagues who had witnessed my firing via Zoom the day before. System clean out, I explained calmly to those who asked. No one stopped me. I systematically backed up source code, circuit diagrams, and original files. All the evidence needed to prove ownership. As I packed my personal items, a young intern approached, holding out an old USB drive. Ms. Morgan, you left this in the lab last week. I smiled. Keep it, Alex. It might come in handy someday. The thumb drive contained nothing important, but the gesture wasn't about the drive. It was about planting a seed. When the story broke, Alex would remember this moment and understand what real mentorship looked like. The suburban coffee shop where I met Sophie was deliberately chosen for its distance from both Orion and Horizon offices. Neutral territory, secluded booths, and baristas who didn't care about semiconductor industry politics. Sophie arrived in her characteristic all-black outfit, tablet in hand, no pretense of small talk. Show me, she said, sliding into the booth. I opened my folder and laid out the documentation, every patent application, every timestamp, every original drawing. Sophie examined them with the precision of someone defusing a bomb. After 20 minutes of silence, she looked up, a slow smile spreading across her face. This is better than I expected. You've been planning this for years. Not planning, I corrected. Protecting? There's a difference. Sophie nodded, then outlined her proposal, a two-pronged approach combining legal action and strategic media placement. Horizon Microsystems would acquire all of my patents, legally, transparently, in exchange for my leadership of their next-generation chip development team. I don't want revenge, I said, stirring my now cold coffee. I want evolution. But if I have to blow up a fake empire to clear the path, so be it. Sophie's smile turned predatory. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. The first shot across Orion's bow came in the form of a press release from Horizon Microsystems announcing a product launch event, Next Generation Green Chip Technology, designed by the brain behind Orion's success. My name wasn't mentioned, just the tantalizing phrase, former team, new ownership. It was enough to send Orion's investors into panic mode and financial journalists into investigation mode. Greg responded predictably, with a dismissive statement calling it desperate PR from market losers. His confidence stemmed from believing my innovations were Orion's property, a misunderstanding that was about to be violently corrected. The legal bomb dropped 3 days later when Sophie sent a patent infringement notice to Greg and Orion's executive team. Attached were 27 patent files with my signature, each with timestamps, original drawings, and comparison documents showing how Orion had been using my intellectual property. Greg called me directly, his voice oscillating between pleading and threatening. I let it go to voicemail and forwarded the recording to Sophie. She called him back. The only price, licensing rights, $55 million annually, 5-year minimum, non-negotiable. His response, I'm told, was unprintable. The collapse happened faster than even Sophie had predicted. News leaked that European partners were suspending orders pending resolution of the patent dispute. 4 key engineers resigned within a week. One sent me a text. Thank you for teaching me not to work for free for thieves. The media began referring to Orion as the company without paperwork, a cutting reference to their inability to produce documentation proving ownership of their core technologies. Greg made a last desperate attempt, offering me a return package that included the CTO position and stock options. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on building something new at Horizon, something that would render Orion's entire product line obsolete. The day of Horizon's launch event arrived. I stood backstage, listening to Sophie introduce the company's new direction. When she called my name, I stepped into the spotlight for the first time in my career. This product, I said, holding up the prototype chip, was born from real intellect, not stolen PowerPoints. As I outlined the specifications of the new technology, I noticed a commotion at the back of the hall. Greg was being served legal papers right there in the audience. Our eyes met briefly. I didn't need to say anything. The future belongs to genuine creators, not idea thieves, I concluded. The applause was deafening. As I walked off stage, this time with my name etched permanently on the chip, I realized that loyalty had never been my weakness. Patience had been my strength. And sometimes, revenge isn't about destruction. It's about creation. That was 5 years ago. Horizon Microsystems now leads the industry in energy-efficient semiconductor design. Our patents form the backbone of technologies powering everything from medical devices to sustainable energy grids. The company that once struggled to compete with giants like Orion now sets the standards others follow. Greg Stanton resigned from Orion 6 months after our confrontation. The company was acquired for pennies on the dollar by a Chinese conglomerate and exists now only as a cautionary tale in business ethics seminars. As for me, I still keep the recording of that Zoom call, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder of the moment when silence ceased to be an option. Sometimes, I play it before making major decisions, not to relive the pain, but to remember the clarity that came with it. The intern, Alex, now leads our testing division. I made sure Clause 9.2 is standard in all our employment contracts. With one addition, innovations are properly credited to their creators, regardless of their position in the company hierarchy. People often ask if I regret not standing up sooner. I don't. Timing matters in circuits and in life. The path I took allowed me to build a complete case, one that couldn't be dismissed or litigated into oblivion by corporate lawyers. What I do regret is every moment I doubted my worth because someone else claimed my achievements. That's the message I share with young engineers who join our team. Document everything, know your value, and understand that loyalty should never require the surrender of your identity. In the end, it wasn't about the patents or even the money. It was about refusing to let someone else's narrative overwrite my reality. Sometimes, the most professional response to unprofessional behavior is to simply walk away, taking your brilliance with you. And if that brilliance happens to illuminate the fundamental weaknesses in the system you left behind, well, that's just good engineering. The beginning. My eyes scanned the Zoom grid of faces, searching for any hint of remorse or surprise as Greg Stanton, CEO of Orion Circuits, continued his presentation using my slides, my diagrams, my life's work. None of the board members seemed uncomfortable. Why would they? This had been our company's unspoken culture for 12 years, my innovations becoming our breakthroughs, which inevitably transformed into Greg's visionary leadership. I'd almost grown comfortable with the arrangement. Almost. The Q3 projections based on this new technology are exceptional, Greg continued, his manicured hand gesturing toward the power consumption graph I had created just last week. We're looking at market dominance in the renewable energy sector by this time next year. I sipped my coffee, camera still off, wondering if anyone else noticed how he emphasized I and my team when discussing successful projects, but switched to we and the company when addressing challenges. Probably not. Greg had perfected the art of the corporate pronoun shift long before it became a subject of management psychology studies. My phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Quarterly performance review, 3 p.m. Another meeting where I'd be told I was invaluable but not quite ready for advancement. The familiar script was becoming tiresome. Before we wrap up, Greg's voice pulled me back to the present. I have some organizational announcements. Something in his tone made me sit straighter. I turned on my camera, more out of instinct than intention. As we pivot toward more aggressive market expansion, we've identified redundancies in our current structure. Greg's eyes flicked toward my video tile, then away. Claire Morgan, your position has been eliminated, effective immediately. HR will contact you regarding transition details. My mind went curiously blank, then hyperactive. Processing multiple realizations simultaneously. I was being fired. My designs were still projected on everyone's screens. No one was objecting. HR hadn't even been professional enough to arrange a private termination meeting. Any questions, Claire? Greg asked, his tone suggesting this was a routine matter rather than the summary execution of a 12-year career. I unmuted myself. Everyone seemed to lean forward slightly, perhaps expecting tears or pleading. Instead, I smiled. Just one. Greg, do you have digital copies of all the patent documentation for the technology you're presenting? His brow furrowed slightly. Of course, legal handles all that. Excellent, I replied. Thank you for confirming. Good luck with everything. I disconnected before he could respond, then sat motionless in my home office, listening to the hum of my computer and the distant sound of neighborhood children playing outside. 12 years of accumulated frustration crystallized into perfect clarity. I opened my personal safe and removed a folder labeled Insurance Policy, containing the original signed copy of my employment contract. I traced my finger over Clause 9.2, the provision my mother had insisted upon when I first joined Orion as a bright-eyed 22-year-old graduate. All patents registered under Claire Morgan's name remain the intellectual property of Claire Morgan, regardless of development timing or employment status. At the time, it had seemed like maternal overprotection. Now, it was my salvation. I opened my laptop and composed a simple email to Sophie Quinn, founder of Horizon Microsystems and Orion's most formidable competitor. Remember your job offer from last year? Let's talk. I bring more value than you realized. Then I made myself another coffee and waited. The game hadn't ended. It had merely entered a new phase. The long betrayal. The first time Greg Stanton took credit for my work, I was 23 years old and had been at Orion Circuits for just under a year. I had developed a signal amplification module that reduced noise interference by 17%, not revolutionary, but significant enough to mention in the quarterly shareholders' meeting. I sat in the back of the conference room, notebook in hand, eager to hear my name associated with the improvement. Instead, I watched Greg gesture to my diagrams and explain how his design team, under his direct guidance, had achieved this breakthrough. My contribution was reduced to being listed 8th in a technical appendix that no one would read. When I approached him afterward, confused and hurt, he placed a paternal hand on my shoulder. Claire, that's how the industry works. No one remembers individual contributors. They remember leaders and companies. Your work matters to the team. But in that room, we need to present a unified front under clear leadership. It sounded reasonable enough to my inexperienced ears. I nodded and returned to my workstation, channeling my disappointment into my next project. The second time it happened, with a more significant innovation in power management, I was more direct. Greg, I spent 6 months developing that protocol. Couldn't you have at least mentioned my name? His smile never wavered. I thought I did. My apologies. Next time. For sure. By the way, here's a little token of appreciation. He handed me a company-branded travel mug. Team Player of the Month. By the third time, I had begun documenting everything. Each innovation, Each line of code, each circuit design was meticulously time-stamped, notarized, and filed for patent protection under my name. Orion's legal department processed the paperwork without scrutiny. They were focused on protecting the company from external threats, not internal documentation, and always in the back of my mind. There was Clause 9.2. My mother had insisted on it after watching her brother, another brilliant engineer, lose his life's work to a company that discarded him when economic headwinds changed. They'll try to own not just your time, but your mind, she had warned. This clause is your intellectual life insurance. Years passed. My innovations became the backbone of Orion's product line. Each time I approached Greg about advancement, recognition, or fair compensation, I received the same response: appreciation for my team spirit, another branded trinket, and the promise that next year would be different. It never was. Colleagues came and went. Some recognized my contributions and offered private words of encouragement or outrage on my behalf. None spoke up publicly. The culture of silence around intellectual attribution was too deeply ingrained. The fear of career repercussions too strong. In my 7th year, when I developed the cross-platform integration system that would become Orion's flagship product, I finally reached my breaking point. After watching Greg present his breakthrough to thunderous applause at the industry's largest conference, I confronted him in the hotel bar. This has to stop, Greg. That was my system, my architecture, my 3 years of work. You didn't even understand how it functioned until I explained it to you last month. His eyes hardened, though his smile remained. Careful, Claire. You're part of a team, remember? No individual is indispensable. He lowered his voice. Besides, everything you develop at Orion belongs to Orion. That's standard contract language. Check your paperwork. I almost told him about Clause 9.2 then. Almost revealed that I had been building my case for years. But something held me back, a strategic instinct that warned against showing my hand too early. Instead, I nodded, apologized for my emotional outburst, and returned to my hotel room. That night, I began seriously documenting not just my innovations but the pattern of appropriation. Emails, meeting recordings, presentation slides, all carefully archived and stored off-site. The next 5 years continued in the same vein. My contributions grew more significant. Greg's appropriation became more brazen. Each time I considered exposing the situation, practical considerations stopped me. I wasn't just building a case anymore, I was building leverage. The longer I waited, the more valuable my intellectual property became to Orion, and potentially to their competitors. When Sophie Quinn first approached me about joining Horizon Microsystems, I was intrigued but not yet ready. I appreciate your interest, I told her over coffee at an industry event. But I have unfinished business at Orion. She studied me with keen eyes. Unfinished business or unrecognized value. Both, I admitted. Sophie handed me her card. When you're ready to be valued appropriately, call me. Horizon doesn't just need your brain. We need your name attached to what your brain creates. I kept her card in my wallet, taking it out occasionally when Greg's behavior became particularly egregious. After each denied promotion, each bonus that failed to materialize despite record profits based on my innovations, I would look at Sophie's card and think, not yet. The leverage isn't strong enough yet. Until that Monday morning Zoom call, when Greg fired me while my designs were still being projected as Orion's future. In that moment, I realized I had been waiting not for more leverage, but for him to make an irreversible mistake. Now The return. The morning after my termination, I drove to Orion's headquarters with the calm determination of someone executing a long-planned mission. The modern glass building that had once represented my professional home now felt like an opponent to be strategically dismantled. The security guard waved me through with a confused smile. Thought you were leaving us, Ms. Morgan? Just collecting some personal items, I replied, tapping my still-functioning badge against the reader. Another oversight that would cost them dearly. The open-plan office fell silent as I walked through, head high, making direct eye contact with colleagues who quickly looked away. Their discomfort was palpable. No one had expected to see me again, especially not looking so composed. I reached my workstation and began systematically gathering evidence. My personal notebooks, filled with original sketches and calculations. USB drives containing development histories and version controls. Physical prototypes I'd built during late nights when the building was empty. My methodical approach attracted attention. Martin from legal hovered nearby, clearly unsure whether to intervene. "Claire, I'm not sure if you should be taking my personal property and research notes." I finished for him. "Don't worry, Martin. I'm leaving all company property intact." His discomfort increased. "Maybe I should accompany you." "That would be appropriate." I agreed pleasantly. "You can verify that I'm not taking anything that doesn't belong to me." As we moved through the development lab, Martin grew increasingly anxious, particularly when I accessed my secured cabinet containing prototype components. "Are those my personal test models, built during unpaid weekend hours?" I explained, showing him my meticulous documentation. "All logged and time-stamped. You can check the building access records if you like." His expression confirmed what I had long suspected. Orion's legal department had never actually reviewed my contract in detail. They had never discovered Clause 9.2, nor had they tracked which patents were registered under my name versus the company's. As I packed my final box, Alex, a promising intern who had often sought my mentorship, approached hesitantly. "Ms. Morgan, you dropped this USB drive in the lab last week." He held out a standard black thumb drive. I considered it for a moment, then smiled. "Keep it, Alex. Consider it part of your education." The drive contained nothing confidential, just some publicly available research papers and open-source code examples I used for teaching. But the gesture wasn't about the content, it was about planting a seed of loyalty that would bloom when the story broke. "One last thing," I said to Martin as we approached the exit. "Could you arrange for my final paycheck to be direct deposited? And I'll need written confirmation that all my accrued vacation time will be paid out." His relief at my mundane requests was evident. "Of course, HR will handle that right away." "Perfect." "Oh, and Martin, make sure Greg gets a message from me." He tensed again. "What message?" "Tell him I said thank you for the clarity." The confusion on his face as I walked out the door was the first truly satisfying moment I'd experienced at Orion in years. The Alliance, Sophie Quinn, was already waiting when I arrived at the small coffee shop 20 miles from both Orion and Horizon offices. Her sleek black suit and perfectly styled silver hair made her look more like a high-end management consultant than the founder of a rising semiconductor company. "You're exactly on time," she noted, pushing a cup toward me. "I ordered your usual, still black, 2 sugars." I nodded, surprised she remembered this detail from our brief interactions at industry events. "I've been monitoring you for 3 years, Claire," she explained, reading my expression. Not in a creepy way, in a "this woman is criminally undervalued" way. I placed my folder on the table between us. "Well, now you know why I never accepted your offers. You were building a case." She tapped the folder. "May I?" For the next 30 minutes, Sophie reviewed my documentation with the focus of a surgeon performing a delicate procedure. Occasionally, she made notes on her tablet or took photos of specific pages. I sipped my coffee and watched her face for reactions. Finally, she closed the folder and leaned back. "Impressive doesn't begin to cover it. You've documented every instance of intellectual appropriation, secured independent timestamps on all innovations, and maintained parallel patent registrations." A slow smile spread across her face. "And Clause 9.2 is legally bulletproof. Your mother is a genius." "Was," I corrected quietly. "She passed away 5 years ago." Sophie nodded respectfully. "Then this is partly for her, too." "It's for everyone who's ever been stolen from," I said. "But I'm not interested in destruction for its own sake. I want to build something better." "That's exactly why I've been trying to recruit you," Sophie replied. Orion's entire business model is fundamentally extractive, taking ideas from people like you and repackaging them as executive brilliance. Horizon is built on attribution and shared success. She outlined her proposal. Horizon would acquire exclusive rights to all my patents, providing both immediate compensation and ongoing royalties. I would join as Chief Innovation Officer, leading the development of next-generation technologies with full credit for my contributions. The legal strategy is straightforward, Sophie continued. We'll issue a formal notice of patent infringement to Orion, offering licensing terms that are technically fair but practically punitive. Simultaneously, we'll announce our acquisition of your intellectual property and your leadership role at Horizon. And when Greg tries to fight it, Sophie's smile turned predatory. That's the beauty of your documentation. There is no fight. You've created an airtight case spanning 12 years. The moment their legal team actually reads your employment contract, they'll know they've lost. I considered the plan, searching for weaknesses or ethical concerns, finding none. I asked the question that had been bothering me since my termination. Why did they let me go now? The timing makes no sense. My latest design is central to their expansion strategy. Sophie's expression darkened. Industry rumor suggests Orion is preparing for acquisition. Streamlining senior technical staff reduces costs and complications. My guess, Greg was planning to sell the company with your innovations as the primary value proposition. But without you as part of the package, the final piece clicked into place. I wasn't just being exploited, I was being erased entirely from the narrative of my own creations. When do we start? I asked. Sophie pulled out a contract and placed it beside my folder. I've had this ready for 3 years, updating it periodically as your value increased. The terms are generous by industry standards and include full creative control of your division. I read the document carefully, noting the explicit recognition of my intellectual property rights and the clear attribution requirements for all innovations. It was everything my Orion contract should have been. One addition, I said, taking out a pen. I want a clause requiring Horizon to properly credit all innovators, regardless of their position in the company hierarchy. Sophie didn't hesitate. Done. That's already our policy. But I'm happy to formalize it. As I signed the contract, I felt the weight of 12 years lifting from my shoulders. I wasn't just changing employers, I was changing the rules of engagement. Now, Sophie said, gathering her things. Let's discuss our media strategy. Timing will be crucial. Outside the coffee shop, as we walked to our cars, she paused. Claire, are you prepared for how personal this might get? Greg won't go down quietly. I thought about all the small humiliations, the stolen credit, the years of patience. I'm not doing this out of anger, I said. I'm doing it because systems only change when the cost of exploitation becomes higher than the cost of fairness. Greg is just a symptom of a larger problem. Sophie nodded, satisfied with my answer. Then let's make this count. As I drove home, I realized that for the first time in 12 years, I was excited about going to work the next day. The strategy. The conference room at Horizon Microsystems felt different from any I'd experienced at Orion. Instead of the sterile minimalism that had characterized Greg's taste, this space featured warm wood tones, comfortable seating, and walls covered with whiteboards filled with calculations and circuit diagrams, each signed by their creators. Sophie had assembled a small team for our strategy session. Herself, Raj Patel, Horizon's legal counsel, Mira Chen, head of communications, and me. No unnecessary hierarchy. No performative power dynamics. Just the essential people needed to execute our plan. Let's begin with legal, Sophie said, nodding to Raj. The attorney placed a tablet in the center of the table, displaying a holographic projection of my patent portfolio. I've reviewed everything Claire provided. The situation is unprecedented, but legally sound. Clause 9.2 of her Orion contract explicitly retained ownership of all patents registered under her name. He manipulated the display, highlighting specific documents. We have 27 distinct patents, all properly registered, documented, and time-stamped. They cover technologies currently used in approximately 78% of Orion's product line. Mira whistled softly. 78%? That's not just components. That's the entire backbone of their operation. Precisely, Raj confirmed. Furthermore, Claire maintained meticulous records of each instance where these patented technologies were presented as Orion's or Greg Stanton's work. The paper trail spans 12 years and includes emails, presentation slides, and recorded meetings. Sophie turned to me. Did you know the full extent of your contribution to their product line? I shook my head. I focused on creation, not quantification. Seeing it laid out like this is illuminating. It's more than illuminating, Raj said. It's a textbook case of systematic intellectual property theft. In normal circumstances, employment contracts would assign these patents to the company. But Clause 9.2 specifically prevents that. It's legally binding and was accepted by Orion when they signed your contract. What's our strategy? I asked. Sophie nodded to Raj, who continued. Two-pronged approach. First, we send a formal patent infringement notice to Orion's board and legal team, detailing each violation and offering licensing terms. What terms? I asked. $55 million annually. 5-year minimum commitment. Sophie replied, fair market value based on their current revenue streams from your technologies, but structured to be practically impossible for them to accept. When they refuse, they'll have two options. Raj explained. Cease using your technologies immediately, which would effectively shut down their operation, or face infringement litigation that they cannot win. I considered this. Their legal team will try to invalidate Clause 9.2. They'll fail, Raj said confidently. The clause was properly executed, clearly worded, and has never been superseded by any subsequent agreement. More importantly, Orion's behavior over 12 years establishes a pattern of acknowledging your innovations while simultaneously attempting to claim them, which actually strengthens our position. Sophie turned to Mira. Communications strategy? The PR expert pulled up her own presentation. We need to control the narrative from the start. I propose a 3-phase approach. She outlined her plan. First, a press release announcing my joining Horizon, highlighting my history of innovation without directly accusing Orion of theft. Second, strategic leaks to industry publications about the patent situation, framed as a David versus Goliath story. Third, a major product announcement showcasing the future applications of my technologies under proper attribution. The key, Mira emphasized, is positioning this as forward-looking creation rather than backward-looking retribution. Claire isn't just leaving Orion, she's advancing the entire industry by bringing her innovations to a company that values attribution and collaborative development. I nodded, appreciating the positive framing. What about Greg specifically? He'll make this personal. Let him, Sophie said firmly. Every personal attack will only highlight the contrast between his leadership style and ours. We don't need to attack him directly. His response to our actions will do that for us. The meeting continued for hours as we refined our approach, identifying potential challenges and preparing contingencies. By the end, we had a comprehensive timeline, starting with my official announcement as Horizon's new Chief Innovation Officer and culminating in a major industry event showcasing our next-generation technology. As the team dispersed, Sophie remained behind with me, studying the holographic display of my patent portfolio. You know what impresses me most? She said quietly. Not just the innovations themselves, though they're brilliant, it's your patience. Most people would have broken years ago, either left or confronted him publicly without proper preparation. I traced the timeline of patents projected before us. I almost did, many times. But each small theft made the eventual reckoning more powerful. I wasn't just building a case, I was letting them create their own dependency. Strategic thinking like that is exactly why you're now our CIO, not just our star engineer. Sophie shut down the projection. Are you ready for what comes next? Once we send that infringement notice, there's no turning back. I thought about Greg's face on that Zoom call, the casual dismissal, the absolute certainty that my contributions belonged to him. I thought about 12 years of watching my ideas transform into his achievements. I thought about all the young engineers at Orion who were being taught that this was normal, acceptable, even necessary for success. I've been ready for 12 years, I replied. Send the notice. The first strike. The press release went live at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday, carefully timed to hit during Orion's weekly executive meeting. Horizon Microsystems announces Claire Morgan as Chief Innovation Officer. The subtitle was The Real Bombshell. Pioneer behind Orion Circuit's core technologies brings her visionary approach to Horizon. Within an hour, my phone was flooded with messages from former colleagues, industry contacts, and journalists. I watched the notifications accumulate as I sat in my new office at Horizon, a space 3 times larger than what I'd had at Orion, with windows overlooking the city and walls I was encouraged to fill with my own designs and patents. Sophie appeared in my doorway, tablet in hand. It's happening faster than we predicted. Orion's stock dropped 4% in the first 30 minutes after our announcement. That's just market jitters, I replied, scanning through messages. They don't understand the full implications yet, but they will. Sophie showed me her screen, displaying an email from Orion's legal department requesting urgent clarification regarding Claire Morgan's intellectual property status. It was addressed to Raj, our legal counsel. How should Raj respond? I asked. He won't. Not yet. Radio silence for 24 hours while speculation builds. Then we deliver the patent infringement notice. Sophie's strategy was clear. Let anxiety and uncertainty do part of our work for us. Throughout the day, industry publications began connecting dots, publishing articles with headlines like Key Orion Engineers' Surprise Move Raises Questions About Patent Ownership and Horizon's Strategic Hire Signals Potential IP Battle. By late afternoon, Greg finally broke his silence with a company-wide email that was promptly leaked to tech blogs. Orion Circuits remains the rightful owner of all technologies developed during Ms. Morgan's employment. Her departure, while regrettable, will not impact our product roadmap or market position. We wish her well in her future endeavors. The calm, professional tone couldn't mask the underlying panic. I forwarded the email to Sophie with a single comment. He still doesn't know about Clause 9.2. That evening, I received a direct message from Greg, the first since my termination. Claire, we should talk privately before this gets out of hand. Whatever grievances you have, I'm sure we can resolve them amicably. Call me. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on preparing for Phase 2 of our plan, the formal legal notification that would transform industry speculation into concrete reality. The next morning, precisely at 9 a.m., Rage delivered our patent infringement notice to Orion's board of directors, legal team, and major investors. The document was comprehensive but ruthlessly clear, 27 detailed patent violations, complete with evidence spanning 12 years, all protected by Clause 9.2 of my original employment contract. The proposed remedy was equally clear. A licensing agreement costing Orion $55 million annually for 5 years minimum, or immediate cessation of using any technology covered by my patents. Within an hour, Greg called an emergency board meeting. One of the board members, a former mentor who had always recognized my contributions privately while remaining silent publicly, texted me, "Nuclear explosion in the boardroom. Legal just confirmed Clause 9.2 is binding." Greg claiming he never knew. Investors demanding answers. Should have listened to you years ago. By noon, Orion's stock had dropped another 12%. Industry analysts were publishing urgent updates about the existential threat to the company's product line. Competitors were circling, sensing weakness. Greg called me 7 times that day. I let each call go to voicemail. Listening to his messages evolved from confident assurance, "This misunderstanding will be cleared up quickly," to barely concealed desperation. "Name your price, Claire. Whatever Horizon is paying, we'll double it." Sophie monitored the situation with the calm precision of a chess grandmaster. He's making exactly the mistakes we anticipated, she noted as we reviewed his latest public statement claiming the situation was a routine legal matter being exaggerated by competitors. When do we move to phase 3? I asked. Tomorrow. Let them stew overnight. By morning, their investors will be demanding action. That's when we announced the product launch event. The next day's press release was simple but devastating. Horizon Microsystems announces revolutionary green chip technology showcase, designed by Claire Morgan, the innovative force behind Orion's current product line. Accompanying the announcement was a technical abstract outlining performance metrics that exceeded Orion's best products by 40%, using technologies I'd been developing but hadn't yet implemented before my termination. The industry reaction was immediate. 3 major electronics manufacturers who had been exclusive Orion clients reached out to Horizon requesting meetings. Tech publications began running features on my career, highlighting the pattern of innovation that had previously been attributed to Orion's R&D team, or directly to Greg. By mid-afternoon, Orion's legal team requested emergency settlement discussions. Raj took the call while Sophie and I listened. Our position is unchanged, Raj stated calmly after hearing their initial offer of $10 million as a good faith resolution. That figure doesn't reflect market reality, the Orion attorney argued. We're prepared to go as high as $20 million, plus public acknowledgement of Ms. Morgan's contributions. The licensing terms are $55 million annually for 5 years, Raj repeated. Non-negotiable. Alternatively, Orion must cease using all patented technologies immediately. That would effectively shut down our operation. Yes, Raj agreed. That is an accurate assessment of your situation. After the call ended, Sophie turned to me. They'll try to fight in court while continuing to use your technologies. Standard delaying tactics. I nodded, which triggers our contingency plan. The next morning, we initiated that plan. Horizon filed for emergency injunctions in 3 countries simultaneously, seeking to prevent Orion from selling products containing my patented technologies pending resolution of the infringement claims. The legal maneuver was aggressive but based on solid evidence. By afternoon, a judge in the European Union had granted the first injunction, effectively blocking Orion from its second-largest market. Greg's response was desperate and public. A company-wide email that was leaked within minutes. This unprovoked attack on our company by a former employee is nothing short of corporate sabotage. Rest assured, we will defend our intellectual property vigorously and emerge stronger than before. All employees are reminded of their confidentiality obligations during this challenging time. The email only fueled the growing narrative that Orion had systematically exploited my innovations. Former colleagues began speaking to journalists, describing instances where my work had been presented as Greg's. Technical forums filled with discussions analyzing patent filings and connecting them to Orion's product developments over the years. By week's end, 4 key engineers had resigned from Orion, one sending me a direct message. Watching you stand up to them gave me courage. Thank you for showing that we don't have to accept theft as the price of employment. The industry was choosing sides, and momentum was clearly with Horizon. What had begun as a personal reckoning was evolving into something larger, a challenge to the accepted practice of corporate appropriation of individual innovation. As Sophie put it when we reviewed the week's developments, you didn't just take back your patents, Claire. You're changing how the entire industry thinks about intellectual attribution. I wasn't sure if that had been my intention when this began, but I was increasingly certain it was the outcome I wanted. The counter-move. Greg Stanton's first serious counter-move came 10 days after our initial announcement. Orion filed an emergency motion claiming Clause 9.2 was invalidated by subsequent employment agreements I'd signed during my tenure, specifically annual confidentiality renewals and bonus acceptance forms. I received the news during a development meeting with my new team at Horizon. Sophie appeared at the door, her expression more amused than concerned. They're claiming your bonus acceptance forms supersede your original contract, she explained, passing me a tablet displaying the legal filing. I scanned the document, then handed it to Raj, who had joined us. They're desperate, he observed. These standard forms contain no language about patent ownership or intellectual property rights. They're grasping at procedural straws. How long will this delay things? I asked. Minimal impact, Raj assured me. We anticipated this approach. Our response is already prepared, including signed affidavits from 3 former Orion legal staff confirming that bonus forms were never intended or presented as contract modifications. The next day, Greg attempted a different tactic, one I hadn't anticipated. He called a press conference and struck a conciliatory tone, acknowledging my significant contributions to Orion's success while expressing deep regret that communication breakdowns had led to this unfortunate situation. He announced a new company policy of crediting individual innovators and unveiled a Claire Morgan Innovation Grant for young engineers. The performance was masterful, humble, forward-looking, and designed to position him as a reasonable leader blindsided by an ungrateful employee. He's trying to reframe the narrative, Sophie noted as we watched the recording. Make it seem like this was all a misunderstanding that could have been resolved internally if you hadn't been so aggressive. Will it work? I asked. Mira, our communications head, shook her head. Not with the evidence we have. We've been careful to frame this as a legal and ethical matter, not a personal vendetta. His attempt to personalize it actually weakens his position. She was right. Within hours, technology journalists were publishing point-by-point analyses of Greg's claims, contrasting his new position with years of public statements taking credit for innovations now proven to be mine. One particularly damaging article included video compilations of Greg presenting his breakthroughs at industry events, juxtaposed with patent filings showing my name and earlier dates. The most effective response, however, came not from us but from within Orion itself. 3 mid-level managers submitted their resignation simultaneously, releasing a joint statement that they could no longer work for an organization that built its success on systematically exploiting its most innovative employees. Their departure triggered a cascade. By the end of the week, Orion had lost 17 employees across engineering, marketing, and product development. Each departure further destabilized the company and strengthened our narrative. Greg's next move was predictable, but still painful. He began calling my former colleagues, seeking damaging information about my work habits, interpersonal skills, or professional conduct. Most refused to cooperate. But a few, those who had benefited most directly from the old system, provided statements suggesting I had been difficult, secretive, or unwilling to collaborate. Orion's legal team attempted to use these statements to build a counter-narrative, that I had deliberately withheld information from the company, violating the spirit, if not the letter, of my employment obligations. Sophie was unconcerned. This is desperation tactics. None of it addresses the central issue of patent ownership. Let them waste resources on character assassination while we focus on the legal and technical fronts. She was right again. The judge overseeing our injunction request in the U.S. dismissed Orion's character evidence as irrelevant to the patent dispute, noting dryly that the personality traits of an inventor have no bearing on their intellectual property rights. 2 weeks into the conflict, we received intelligence that truly confirmed Orion's desperate position. They had approached 3 of their largest clients seeking emergency contract amendments that would protect them from liability if they needed to rapidly change their technology base. They're preparing for the possibility of losing access to your patents entirely. Sophie explained. Their contingency plan would require at least 6 months of development to replace your technologies with alternatives. Do alternatives even exist? I asked. Not without significant performance degradation, replied David Young, Horizon's technical director who had joined our strategy team. Your energy efficiency algorithms are at least 2 generations ahead of competitors. That's why this is existential for them. The next day, Greg made his final play. He requested a private meeting with me, no lawyers, no Sophie, just the 2 of us at a neutral location. The message came through Martin from Orion's legal department, who had always been fair to me. He's authorized to offer you CTO position, 15% equity, and full credit for all past and future innovations. Martin explained carefully over the phone. He wants to resolve this directly, engineer to engineer. I thanked Martin and discussed the offer with Sophie and Raj. It's actually not a bad deal financially, Raj admitted. The equity alone would be worth more than our initial settlement demand if they recover from this. But it would mean returning to a company built on exploitation, Sophie pointed out. And working directly with Greg after everything that's happened. I considered the offer carefully, weighing the financial benefits against the principles at stake. In the end, the decision wasn't difficult. Tell Martin I appreciate the offer but must decline, I instructed Raj. Our original licensing terms remain available if Orion wishes to continue using my technologies. The response came within hours. Orion's board had removed Greg as CEO, effective immediately. The interim leadership team requested 48 hours to formulate a good faith resolution proposal, addressing both the patent dispute and proper attribution for my contributions. Sophie and I exchanged glances as we read the news. This isn't just about your patents anymore, she said quietly. You've forced an entire company to confront its culture. I thought about all the young engineers still at Orion, those who had watched their innovations disappear into the corporate machine year after year. That was always the point, I replied. The patents were just the leverage. The unveiling. The Horizon Microsystems product launch was scheduled for exactly 1 month after my joining the company. A timeline that would have been impossible if I hadn't been developing these technologies in parallel while still at Orion. The venue was the International Technology Forum in San Francisco, an industry-wide gathering that Greg had always dominated with his charismatic presentations of his breakthroughs. This year would be different. As I prepared backstage, reviewing my presentation one final time, Sophie appeared with news. Orion's board has accepted our licensing terms, full amount, full attribution requirements, no contests. I lowered my tablet. They capitulated completely? Their new interim CEO is Alexandra Voss. You know her. I nodded. Alexandra had been Orion's operations director, one of the few executives who had always acknowledged my contributions privately, though she too had remained silent publicly. She convinced the board that fighting was futile and damaging. Sophie continued. The agreement includes a public statement acknowledging your role in developing their core technologies over the past 12 years. I took a moment to process this information. Complete victory, achieved in just 4 weeks. The vindication was satisfying, but something felt unfinished. Greg? I asked. Negotiating his exit package. The agreement includes a non-disparagement clause that prevents him from publicly challenging your contributions. Sophie studied my expression. This was never about him personally, was it? No, I replied. It was about changing a system that enabled him, that enabled all of us to accept theft as normal business practice. A production assistant appeared, signaling 5 minutes until my introduction. Sophie squeezed my shoulder. Ready to show them what attribution-based innovation looks like? I nodded and followed her toward the stage. The auditorium was packed, industry executives, engineers, journalists, and surprisingly, many former Orion colleagues. As I waited in the wings, I spotted Alex, the young intern who had handed me the USB drive during my last visit to Orion. He had texted me last week about accepting a junior position at Horizon. I gave him a small wave, which he returned with an enthusiastic thumbs up. Sophie took the stage first, outlining Horizon's vision of ethical innovation and proper attribution. Then she introduced me, her voice carrying a note of genuine admiration. The woman whose brilliance has shaped semiconductor technology for over a decade, finally receiving the recognition she deserves. Horizon's Chief Innovation Officer, Claire Morgan. The applause as I walked on stage was overwhelming. I had never been the focus of such attention before, having always worked in the background while others presented my achievements. The spotlight felt strange, but not unwelcome. Thank you, I began, waiting for the applause to subside. For most of my career, I've let my work speak for itself, sometimes too quietly. Today, I'd like to speak for my work and the future it can help build. I unveiled our new technology, a microchip architecture that reduced power consumption by 43% while increasing processing capability by 28%, designed specifically for renewable energy applications and medical devices. As I explained the technical specifications and potential applications, I noticed something remarkable. The audience was engaged not just with the innovation itself, but with the story of how it was created. This architecture wasn't developed in isolation, I explained, highlighting the contributions of team members who had joined me at Horizon. True innovation is rarely the product of a single mind. No matter how the story is sometimes told, it emerges from collaboration, from building upon each other's ideas while respecting their origins. As I concluded my presentation, a commotion at the back of the hall caught my attention. Greg had entered, seemingly intent on witnessing the event despite his removal as CEO. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded room. I felt no anger, just a certain completeness, the circle closing on 12 years of silent accumulation. Rather than acknowledging him, I turned back to the audience and held up the prototype chip, its surface gleaming under the stage lights. This technology was born from real intellect and genuine collaboration, not stolen presentations or misattributed credit. At Horizon, we believe the future belongs to companies that value creators, not those who exploit them. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for the technology, it was for the principle. As I looked out at the faces of engineers and designers whose own innovations had likely been appropriated throughout their careers, I realized we had tapped into something far larger than a patent dispute between two companies. Backstage after the presentation, journalists surrounded me with questions about the technology, the dispute with Orion, and what it meant for the industry. I answered each query carefully, focusing on the future rather than the past, on creation rather than grievance. As the crowd thinned, Alex approached with a small package. Ms. Morgan, that is, some of us from Orion who are joining Horizon, wanted you to have this. Inside was a simple silver plaque engraved with the names of 27 patents and a single line. The truth emerges. I looked up to find several former colleagues standing behind Alex, each wearing a Horizon employee badge. They had followed me not out of loyalty to me personally, but to the principle I had defended. Thank you, I said, genuinely moved. But this isn't just about acknowledging my work, it's about ensuring none of you ever experience what I did. We know, said Eliza, a brilliant circuit designer who had worked under me for 5 years. That's why we're here. You changed the rules. Later that evening, as the formal events concluded, Sophie found me on the venue's rooftop terrace, gazing out at the city lights. The technology is impressive, she said, joining me at the railing. But what you've really built is a new standard. 3 other companies have already contacted us about implementing similar attribution policies. I smiled. Protecting intellectual property is good business. It turns out. It's more than that, Sophie replied. You've made ethical behavior a competitive advantage. That's the real innovation here. She was right. In forcing Orion to acknowledge my contributions, I had created a template for others to follow, not through destruction, but through the creation of a better alternative. As we stood there, my phone buzzed with a notification. Orion had issued their public statement acknowledging my role in developing their core technologies. The final piece had fallen into place. What's next? Sophie asked, reading the notification over my shoulder. I thought about the half-finished designs in my new office, the ideas I'd been developing privately for years, the technologies that could transform renewable energy implementation globally. Now, I said, we build something no one can steal. The transformation. 5 years passed faster than I could have imagined. Horizon Microsystems grew from a promising mid-tier competitor into an industry leader, with our energy-efficient semiconductor designs becoming the standard in renewable energy systems, medical devices, and sustainable infrastructure worldwide. Our market capitalization quadrupled, but more significantly, our attribution-based innovation model transformed how the entire industry operated. The Morgan Principle, as industry publications began calling it, spread beyond Horizon. Companies discovered that publicly crediting their innovators not only improved employee retention, but created a powerful recruitment advantage. Engineering graduates began asking about attribution policies during interviews, prioritizing transparency over traditional perks. Orion Circuits struggled under its licensing obligations to me, but eventually stabilized under Alexandra Voss's leadership. She implemented comprehensive attribution policies and restructured the company's innovation processes to focus on genuine collaboration rather than executive appropriation. While they never regained their former market dominance, they found a sustainable niche developing specialized applications of my technologies. Greg Stanton disappeared from the industry entirely. Rumors occasionally surfaced about consulting positions or startup ventures, but nothing substantial materialized. His name became a cautionary tale in business schools, a case study in how intellectual appropriation might provide short-term gains but ultimately destroys value and trust. As for me, I found the public recognition initially uncomfortable, but gradually learned to appreciate its value. Not for my ego, but for the example it set for younger engineers. I still kept the recording of that final Zoom call. Not out of bitterness, but as a reminder of the clarity that comes when pretense falls away. On the 5th anniversary of my joining Horizon, Sophie organized a small celebration in our expanded headquarters. The attendees included my original development team, several former Orion colleagues who had followed me to Horizon, and a group of engineering students from the scholarship program we had established. "I've been asked to say a few words," Sophie began, raising her glass. "But first, I want everyone to look around this room." We did as instructed, taking in the diverse group of engineers, designers, and innovators. 5 years ago, Claire didn't just bring patents to Horizon, she brought a vision of how innovation should work: open, attributed, and collaborative. Sophie's gaze met mine across the room. That vision has created not just market value, but human value. Everyone in this room knows exactly who contributed what to our success. And that transparency has made us stronger, not weaker. She gestured to the wall where our patents were displayed, each listing every contributor, not just primary inventors. This is Claire's real legacy. Not the technologies themselves, though they're extraordinary, but the system that ensures each mind receives recognition for what it creates. After the formal speeches, Alex, now leading our testing division, approached me with a tablet. "Have you seen this?" It was an industry news article announcing that the International Engineering Standards Committee had adopted the Morgan Attribution Framework as a recommended best practice for all member companies. The framework required clear documentation of individual contributions to patented technologies and prohibited the erasure of innovators from public presentations of their work. "Your mother would be proud," Alex said quietly. Knowing the story of how she had inserted Clause 9.2 into my original contract, I nodded, unexpectedly emotional. She always said intellectual property wasn't just about legal protection, it was about human dignity. Later, as the celebration wound down, I found myself in my office, looking at the framed copy of Clause 9.2 that hung beside my first patent. Sophie joined me, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, passing me a cup. "I was thinking about alternative histories," I replied. What if I had confronted Greg earlier? What if I had left Orion the first time he took credit for my work? What if I had never had Clause 9.2 in my contract? Sophie considered this. The most effective revolutions often come from within the system. Once you understand exactly how it works, your patience wasn't weakness, it was strategic. Still, 12 years is a long time to wait. But look what those 12 years built. She gestured toward the campus outside my window, where engineers moved between buildings, their conversations animated by the freedom to create without fear of appropriation. Not just technologies, but proof that ethical innovation is sustainable innovation. I sipped my coffee, appreciating the truth in her words. I get letters, from engineers at other companies who use the framework to protect their innovations. from students who entered the field because they saw that individual contribution could be valued. That's how you know you've created something lasting, Sophie said. When it continues to grow beyond your direct influence. As she left, I turned back to the window, watching the sun set over the campus that had grown from our vision of attributed innovation. I thought about all the circuits I had designed, all the problems I had solved, all the technologies I had brought into the world. Each had my name attached now. But more importantly, each had helped create a system where other innovators could see their names attached to their creations. In the end, it wasn't about the patents or even the recognition. It was about restoring the connection between creator and creation, a connection that no Zoom call, no corporate appropriation, and no systemic exploitation could permanently sever. I had been fired over Zoom while my slides were still showcasing my ideas. They thought I'd stay silent like always, but that time, I didn't just leave. I took the company's heart with me and handed it to my ex-boss's biggest rival. And in doing so, I helped build something better than revenge, a future where innovation belongs to those who actually create it.